संगीताचे तळमन यशस्वीपणे ओळखणारा मर्मज्ञ डॉक्टर अशोक रानडे. बुद्धिजीवी माणसाचे आकलन, निरीक्षण क्षमता, विचारातले तारतम्य त्याच्या निवडलेल्या कामात दिसते. उच्च शिक्षित व सुसंस्कृत वातावरणात वाढलेला कलाकार हा नेहमी अनुकरणापेक्षा डोळस अनुसरण करणारा आणि खुल्या मनाचा असतो, असं माझं निरीक्षण आहे. याचं उत्तम उदाहरण म्हणजे ज्येष्ठ संगीततज्ञ, वाग्गेयकार, समीक्षक, संगीतशास्त्रज्ञ, संगीताचार्य अशोक दामोदर रानडे. एक प्रयोगशील कलाकार नेहमीच नाविन्याच्या शोधात असतो हे आपण सर्वच जाणतो. पण त्याचवेळी तो कलाकार आपल्या समृद्ध परंपरेची कास सोडत नाही, तर परंपरेतीलच नवता शोधतो असं मला वाटतं. कारण आपल्या भारतीय समृद्ध संगीत परंपरेला पुरातन काळात मार्गी संगीत म्हटलं गेलंय. मार्गी या शब्दाची उत्पत्ती मृग धातूपासून सांगितली गेली आहे, ज्याचा अर्थ शिकार करण्यासाठी सावजाचा पाठलाग करणे, शोधणे, म्हणजेच नवीन मार्गक्रमण करणे असा होय. संगीताचे बाळकडू, उत्तम संस्कार, अफाट बुद्धिमत्ता, चिकित्सक डोळस वृत्ती व सर्वसमावेशकता या काही गुणविशेषांमुळेच डॉक्टर अशोकदा रानडे हे रसायन घडले आणि त्यांच्या आयुष्याला व्यापलेल्या संगीताच्या विविध संदर्भांमधून त्यांनी अभ्यास केला. यावरून संगीताची व्याप्तीच त्यांनी आपल्यासमोर उलगडून ठेवली आहे असं लक्षात येतं. संगीत आणि लोककला, संगीत आणि मानसशास्त्र, संगीत आणि जनसंवाद माध्यम, एथनोम्युझिकोलॉजी यासारख्या अनेक विधा आणि कला शाखांमधील नवे पैलू ते हाताळत. इतकंच नव्हे तर त्यावर सप्रात्यक्षिक व्याख्यान देत. यावरून त्यांच्या संगीत व्यासंगाची कल्पना येते. हे सगळे दिव्य पार पाडताना आपल्या संगीताशी असलेला त्यांचा प्रामाणिकपणा त्यांनी कधीच ढळू दिला नाही, हे अतिशय मोलाचं असं वाटतं. वेळप्रसंगी आपली परखड मतं त्यांनी ठामपणे पारदर्शी वृत्तीने मांडलेली दिसतात. त्यांची निर्भीड वृत्ती लक्षात घेताना तिला हुकुमशाहीपासून, दंभाचारापासून दूर ठेवण्याचे कौशल्य फार वाखाणण्याजोगे आहे. दुसऱ्याच्याही मताचा आदर करता यायला हवा असा दंडकच त्यांनी घालून दिला असं म्हटलं तर ती अतिशयोक्ती ठरू नये. त्यांची समीक्षा अतिशय सकस, अभ्यासपूर्ण, मर्माग्रही होती. याचा प्रत्यय संगीत संगती या विदर्भ साहित्य संघ ग्रंथालय नागपूर यांच्या पुढाकाराने साकारलेल्या ग्रंथाधिष्ठित संगीत सभेची पूर्वतयारी करताना मला आला. या गायन सभेत नुसतेच गायनाचे प्रस्तुतीकरण नसून सप्रात्यक्षिक म्हणजे लेकडेम स्वरूपाचे सांगीतिक भाष्य आणि उदाहरणादाखल गायनाचे काही अंश असे स्वरूप आम्ही ठेवले होते. हा अभिनव उपक्रम करताना अशोकदांचे क्लिष्ट लेखन साध्या सोप्या शब्दात मांडताना माझ्या आकलन शक्तीचा अगदी कसच लागला होता. त्यांचे लेखन अनुभवताना त्यांचे भाषेवरील प्रभुत्व मला जाणवले. पण त्याचवेळी साध्या सोप्या भाषेच्या प्रयोगामुळे त्यांची विचारधारा जास्तीत जास्त जिज्ञासूंपर्यंत पोचवता येईल असा प्रामाणिक प्रयत्न संगीत संगती या माझ्या कार्यक्रमातून आम्ही सर्वजणांनी केला. विशेष म्हणजे या कार्यक्रमासाठी अशोकदांचे शिष्योत्तम, म्युझिकोलॉजिस्ट आणि सुप्रसिद्ध संवादिनी वादक डॉक्टर केशव चैतन्य कुंटे आणि सुप्रसिद्ध शास्त्रीय गायक सुरेश बापटजी यांचाही सहभाग आणि मोलाचं मार्गदर्शन मला यासाठी मिळालं. अशोकदांच्या साहित्याचा अभ्यास करताना मला असं खूप प्रकर्षाने जाणवलं की आमच्यासारख्या नव्या पिढीतील संगीतोपासकांनी पळपुटेपणाने किंवा अशोकदांचं लेखन अतिशय क्लिष्ट आहे, अगम्य आहे असं न समजता अशा प्रकारचं विचारगर्भ सांगीतिक साहित्य थेट अव्हेरण्यापेक्षा त्याचा ध्यास जागता ठेवत पाठपुरावा करणे ही आजच्या काळाची गरज आहे. यामुळेच आपली संगीतकला अधिक समृद्ध होणार आहे, यात काही शंकाच नाही.
Friends, we in India describe ethnomusicology as cultural musicology. And that's why the approach which is indicated by the discipline is applied to at least 5 categories of music, namely primitive music, folk music, devotional music, art music, and popular music. If anybody wants to discuss anything about Indian music, he has to discuss all these 5 categories if he wants to fulfill the scholastic ambition of being a thorough person. I don't have those ambitions. And I will confine my remarks to only one category of music, which is generally known as classical music. In India, we prefer to call it art music. Perhaps one word about the categories. We don't view categories of music as producer-oriented categories. We do not mean that art music is something which is created by those persons who profess to be artists. Similarly, we do not maintain that primitive music is that music which is produced by the primitive people. For example, those tribals. As you know, we have 5 million unassimilated tribals and 20 million semi-assimilated tribals. We don't refer to producer-oriented categories of music. We feel that even in music produced by the urban people, there are likely to be and bound to be elements which need to be described as primitive. Because ultimately, music has to address itself to 5 levels of consciousness which are represented by these 5 categories. So categories are to be understood as experiential categories and not as producer-oriented categories. I have approached the subject from various angles, and the first slide would tell us what are those angles. The disciplines which I have used for approaching the subject are vocabulary, not linguistics, but vocabulary studies, Ayurveda, which is the indigenous medicine system of India, mythology, religion, yoga, folklore, and musicology. Unless one tries to understand the relationship of music and aging in the perspectives offered by these disciplines, it will be difficult to understand why in India, Hindustani, at least musicians, art musicians, in spite of their old age, are honored and they are expected to perform, and they do perform. As soon as you see the slide, yes, vocabulary is really speaking the day-to-day use of language to describe issues which are connected with music as well as aging. The strategy which I have applied is to collect vocabulary clusters, terminological clusters, which are related to aging, age, chronological age, psychological age, music making, music of the old people. All types of terms were brought together. As you know, India has a problem of population explosion as well as language explosion. And we have too many languages. I have basically relied on Indo-European languages like Sanskrit, Marathi, Bengali, Gujarati, and Hindi. And my study is based on vocabulary clusters which are available in these languages. What are the insights offered by these vocabularies? Interesting to note, vocabulary, day-to-day use of the language suggests that aging is to be determined by the number of years human body manages to pass through. So it's a very objective sort of definition, and the methodology and mechanisms which are used to assess age are those which are used for time measurement. Secondly, aging is definitely described as a loss or diminution of bodily powers. Thirdly, the notion of aging is viewed as a phase leading to intangible and or psychological gains in aptitudes, attitudes, as well as certain abilities, and this I think is a very positive aspect. Fourthly, even though there are certain words which connote immortality, the total context suggests that these states, that is, states of immortality or eternity, are viewed in the common language as mythical states, and so that there is no hope given to common human mortals to attain those states, at least in the common language. Finally, all these insights, the four insights I offered, they are supposed to be running concurrently. That is, one can't say that this is limited to first 10 years and this is limited to next 7 years. Nothing like that. All these insights run concurrently. When we move to Ayurveda, these are the language vocabulary perspectives which are referred to: measurable objective passage of time, diminution of bodily powers, growth in maturity, wisdom, and inevitable like mortality. I mean, people have been always saying that India believes in mythology. It does, but it does not mix day-to-day life with mythology. There is another plane on which life leads, and that is the mythological plane. Next, please. Now, this is the oldest system of medicine current even today, practiced to a great extent, and now subjected to more rigorous laboratory-based analysis. And Ayurveda has two major perspectives to offer. A very interesting point made by traditional definitions of Ayurveda suggests that longevity is actually related to long life of individual components. So it's not that the whole body has to be in the same peak power. There are some organs which are more powerful, continue to be operative, continue to be functional, and some others don't. So Ayurveda, by definition, tries to suggest that if you can operate on all the components and try to increase the durability of them individually, perhaps you would be leading yourselves to longevity. And secondly, it says that all the components age in varying paces, so that if you know the paces, you will be able to control them. Next, please. In obvious continuation of the theme, Ayurveda has tried to assess the duration of life which is available to human beings. Traditionally, the first mention always suggests 120 years and 5 days. Now, this is a coexistence. I mean, I have seen that right from the morning we have been making references to 120, the magic figure of it. And here is 120 years and 5 days. Next mention, as you move from Vedic times onwards, is 100 years, perhaps more pragmatic, because the other texts which follow from 2nd century onwards to about 16th Ayurveda texts, they always believe in the possibility of living for 100 years at least. In fact, the blessings which are given by elders to the youngers are also couched in a language which suggests that 100 is supposed to be the most acceptable figure. Thirdly, there are 7 beings who have been singled out as immortal, and all those 7 which are mentioned there, Ashwathama, Bali, Vyasa, Maruti, Vibhishana, Kripa, and Parshurama, all these 7, sad to say, there is not a single female involved here. And all these 7 come from various castes. They are known in mythology for their various functions, and they are also known to have attained immortality, whether they wish it or not. This was imposed on them because of or as a result of their doings in their own life. So immortality is not to be viewed every time as a boon. It might also be a curse, and that has been well argued by Ayurveda as well as mythology. Next, please. Ayurveda, in its consolidated position, has 8 main angas, as they call, aspects, and they deal with, as it has been suggested, Bala Chikitsa. I am reading the Sanskrit one, the English ones are seen. Kaumara Bhritya, then Urdhvanga Chikitsa, then Bhuta Vidya or Graha Chikitsa, then Shalya Chikitsa, Rasayana Chikitsa, Vajikarana or Vajikarana, and last one is Damshtra Chikitsa. Perhaps a word more about the sixth one and the third one. The Urdhvanga Chikitsa is important because it has been associated with old age. Ayurveda text says that the upper part of the body is the main part which suffers due to old age, and that's why there is that separate branch which thinks about it. Similarly, Rasayan Chikitsa, the sixth one, this is also a separate branch. And it's very interesting to note that Rasayana Chikitsa, there are texts which tell you that when should you start moving in the direction of Rasayana Chikitsa, that is doing that therapy. Well, it says immediately after the middle age or perhaps even earlier, so that you are supposed to anticipate old age well in advance and prepare yourself for it. And fortunately, what the Rasayan Chikitsa advocates is not very difficult to do. Perhaps when you do it as a therapy, it's difficult to do because there are certain compulsions involved in. But if you don't understand what it means and then you practice it, perhaps it's very easy to do that. Perhaps a word or two later on as we move on. Next, please. Now, this suggests to you the 120 years time span, and it gives you a very systematic presentation of what happens in each decade of human life. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, etc., up to 120. And if you look at that carefully, from 90 onwards is supposed to be the real old age. Till that point of time, it's only an approach to old age, not an old age at all. And from 90 to 120 perhaps, then where you are on the decline, but otherwise you are full of vigor, you can do things and you can change the pattern of your life as well as of those around, because ultimately you are a part of a society. If you behave in a particular manner, the whole society has to change. I am reminded almost of a resonant line from T.S. Eliot. In one place he says, if I write one good poem, the whole poetic tradition from Homer to Eliot changes. So similarly, if you have one act in a particular age group, well, the whole society has to change because you are a part of the total society. Next, please. Now, this Charaka Samhita, Charaka is the name of the person who is supposed to have compiled the Samhita, the text, basically deals with Rasayana Chikitsa, that is old age treatment. And that's why I have dwelt slightly more on this Charaka Samhita now. Again, the problem of chronology is foxing us, but people maintain that perhaps Charaka Samhita can be dated to around 200 AD. From 200 AD, Charaka Samhita was practiced and it's still available. Now, I will just read through that list perhaps or explain some of the features. Charaka Samhita is distinct from the other Ayurvedic texts. This is definitely necessary to remember. Firstly, there are structural features. How the subjects are indexed and how the chapter headings are done. This is important because the content suggests to you that Charaka Samhita was a result of assimilation of various influences which are otherwise would be treated as non-Indian. Charaka mentions northwestern India and other mentions like Balakistan, Persia, China and Central Asia are also seen. So this again is important to remember because that gives us the hinterland of the thought process which was codified in Charaka Samhita. Next, Charaka Samhita seems to be irreligious in tone. It's very important to note that. It definitely mentions Brahmins and cows with lot of respect, but then it does not blame anybody if a Brahmin is mistreated. And that I think is an important point to note because Charaka Samhita then becomes more of a representative thought that India has produced about Ayurveda and especially about old age. It also seems that Charaka Samhita was a continuation of an earlier tradition, and even then Charaka Samhita contributed when it tried to mention two words often. One is yukti, that is rationalization of thinking. It's obvious that people feel, and people are perhaps right in that, that whenever you mention occult, whenever you mention superhuman phenomena, whenever you mention that mystic states and their processes, one feels that perhaps we are not rational enough. Well, Charak Samhita differs great deal. It talks about yukti as a strategy. Yukti means rationality as a strategy, and it also tries to see that there are pathological and psychological correlates mentioned in the Samhita. I need not say that correlationship means mutual dependence. And if you want to talk about mutual dependencies, you must have two fully developed corresponding systems of thought. Otherwise, it's not possible to build the equation series. And this has been built by Charaka's Samhita. The Samhita talks about pariksha and Samhita. Pariksha means investigation, yukti as a pramana, that is a means of valid knowledge, and it's important to note. Next, very important aspect of Charaka is Charaka dwells on the concept of Deha Manasa, physio-psychological. Nothing in Charaka is totally about physiology or totally entirely about psychology. All the time he says that these two are to be looked together because they are one and the same, and if you treat one, the other is going to affect it. In fact, if you want to treat one, you have also to treat the other one. And that's why the Purusha concept, the man concept, the totality of man is all the time kept in view. His mind-body relationship, which I have talked of just now, Charaka also appends one more very important qualifying phrase, and Charaka says that, allow me to use a bit of Sanskrit here, Prakriti, that is individuality. In simple language it would mean that Charaka will not have common drugs to give. He will say that if you are suffering from cold, then it is you and cold together to be treated. If there is another person who is suffering from cold, again that person and his cold are totally individual. So there are no common drugs to be given, and that's why individuality, prakriti, nature, your own nature is the starting point of the chikitsa. Next, Charaka also talks about rebirth. And Charaka also talks about performing artists who are helpful in hospitalization processes. And he specifically mentions musicians, storytellers, reciters, and those who can do massage of various types. Ayurveda has full chapter on massage. As I refer to Charaka, Charaka being the main one who has talked about, as I said, old age and the treatment. Now we move to a more narrowed down focus of Rasayan Chikitsa, which specifically deals with old age problems. Next, please. Now, according to this Rasayana Chikitsa, it says that old age now to be placed between 70 and 100. So I am telling you the latest position as far as Rasayan Chikitsa is concerned. Secondly, old age is natural, and the other natural ones are mentioned are hunger, thirst, sleep and death. So along with old age is inevitable. So it's placed on par with that. Thirdly, it also says that old age is of two types, Yatha Kala and Akala. Yatha Kala means in proper time. So from 70 to 100, if you start feeling old, you are old in proper time. But if you start feeling old in 17 years or 22 years, then it is Akala, out of time. So out of time old age is not acceptable. Yathakala old age is to be venerated, respected and accepted. So this is how the thinking process has been crystallized. Then as I already shown to you, 100 years timetable was also a result of a crystallized thinking of Rasayan Chikitsa. Further, Rasayan Chikitsa always lays some type of accentuation. It says that, well, certain age means certain diseases, and that's why certain types of shalakya, as I mentioned to you, the treatment of the upper parts of the bodies, that has been singled out. It also singles out, the seventh one is very important, sixth one, Vata principle is the source of all old age disorders. I don't have to go into details, and perhaps I'm not even competent to do that, but Ayurveda bases itself on the principle of three dosha, that is three basic defects. If you develop those defects, then you have to see which defect is the predominant one and you have to treat it. And then it says vata, that is wind principle. If that goes astray, then all the old age troubles are seen. And that's why it mentions that as a very specific principle. Rasayan Chikitsa moves ahead and it says that you can take that up during the Middle Ages. No specific references are made to musicians in Rasayan Chikitsa. So that while Charaka Samhita mentions musicians and performing artists because it has a wider connotation, Rasayan Chikitsa, being a narrower field of vision and inquiry, does not mention performance specifically, though it says that these are the diseases, because as soon as you come to Urdhvanga Chikitsa, voice has been definitely mentioned. In fact, even in musicological texts in India, voice and vocal troubles are always explained in terms of Ayurveda. So that if you really want to understand Indian musicology, you have to have cross-references to these disciplines. Unfortunately, those who know Ayurveda do not know musicology and vice versa. Next, please. Now, another perspective which I talked of was mythological perspective. Very significantly, non-aging and immortality are accepted as mythological truths. It's very interesting to note. And that's why gods are called Ajara and Amara. Gods are Ajara, that is, they do not suffer from old age, and Amara, they never die. It's only given to the gods. The unfortunate abilities of not dying and remaining not old are only reserved for the gods, not for the human beings. Secondly, there is a category which is mentioned as a Chiranjiva, that is immortal. But I have mentioned earlier, it's not totally a boon, it's often a result of a curse. Though there are herbs mentioned which can help you. There is a third mythological perspective, phenomenon of mantra culture, and where one type of mantras are mentioned, these are called Mrityunjaya, that is victory over death. But this is only to avoid a predestined but untimely death. So if somebody knows beforehand that this young man is going to die, and if he feels the young man should not die, he is young, then that death can be avoided, and for that the Mrityunjaya mantra is. So Sanjivani Vidya is to revive the dead. Aging is transferable and reversible. A very dutiful son can take over the old age of the father in return of a boon which a father gives to him. Now these type of things are Mahabharata, Ramayana, they are replete with these stories. And lastly, drugs and rituals can help you to maintain an unimpairable youth. This was the mythological perspective that I talked of. Next, please. And now we come to a very interesting point. As I said, I wanted to have the cultural perspective, but ultimately cultural perspective would remain of no use unless things are tied down to the contemporary performing traditions. And as I said, I myself decided that I will try to have some varied types of corroborative evidences. And here is one type of evidence. From 1919 onwards, I checked out accounts, reports of old musicians' performances as they were reported in dailies or diaries or reminiscences of various people. You will see that the first one is a Brahmin hailing from Maharashtra area. The second performance quoted is also by the same gentleman. The third one, Ustad Alladiya Khan, belongs to a different gharana. He is a Muslim, hailed from Rajasthan, came to Bombay. Then Vishnu Digambar, one legendary figure who has been a missionary for as far as spread of music is concerned. Then you have again Alladiya Khan, but as you will see, the first reported description was when he was 72 years age. Then second one is 79. Then you have Ramakrishna Bua Vase at the age of 70. His performance was reported. Then again Alladiya when he was 89 years old, and Ustad Rajab Ali when he was 74. These are only written accounts of performances of musicians who can be ascertained to be old when they perform. So this is one type of corroborative evidence that I am talking of. It's very interesting. Culling from the evidences, one sees that Indian musicians, even when they are old, they do not change the their repertoire of singing. They continue to sing the same ragas which they have been singing in their youth. So there doesn't seem to be any narrowed focus of performing ability visualized in the corpus or the tradition itself. The musicians continue to sing as they were. Secondly, even the procedures of practice as well as performance do not change. They follow the same procedure. You know, there are certain sequences which are musically important. So they are never blurred over. They are not slurred over. They are followed in exact detail. Musical maturity is definitely commented upon. All the reports of these performances make a point again and again that I had heard this raga before, but when this gentleman, when this veteran sang, it was a totally different character. And musicians themselves, from their point of view, they have been saying that, well, I had been singing this raga for 50 years, but now I know that it is much mellower than I used to sing. Now I know there are nuances which I had overlooked, and now I am trying to project them. And at the receiving end, the audience also has always been receptive to these nuances, and that's very important. It's very interesting to note one more term before we pass over to the next type of evidence. In Hindustani art music, a term Buzurg is always mentioned. Buzurg means veteran. But this is only a translation. The connotation is much wider. And Buzurg means one who is respected for his knowledge. A Buzurg has certain rights. For example, in a musical performance, he will be the last person to perform. When he enters the hall, his place would be in the forefront. It will be reserved for him. Even if he comes late, latecomers are not bound to sit at the back. No. It's their right to come late, disturb, and sit at the front. It's allowed. That's one sign of showing respect. Ultimately, all signs of respect and gestures of respect are deviations from normalcy. So I think this is perfectly legitimate. Then before a younger performer starts his performance, he has to ask permission from the elders who are present in the audience. And of course, as you know, in Indian chamber music, as it is known, the audience is at the handshaking distance, so that I can see all the 4 or 5 buzurgas sitting before me. I will do namaskar to them, or if I am Muslim, I will do this, so that asking permission. Then they will say, okay, begin. And then, in the name of God, I will begin my concert. That's the procedure. Further, a buzurg, a veteran performer, will not give you his sign of approval very soon. And if he does that, then he is not a buzurg. And the later he gives the sign, the better for the musician, because he has to try his best. And secondly, euphemism reigns supreme as far as veteran performers' comments are concerned. They will only say 1 or 2 sentences, and that is supposed to be, well, I feel that, oh, I am blessed. He talked about my music in 1 full sentence, and that's something. So this is accepted, and Buzurgi means all this. There are certain rights and privileges, I said, and this is one of the rights of the privilege. When, and if and when I sing like somebody else, that is, you know, some Buzurga sitting here, then I will hold my ears and say, this is, I am singing in your imitation, but it's quite likely that I will commit some mistakes, so that you must pardon me beforehand. So that my right to copy him is not negated, it's not denied. But at the same time, I have to accept in public that debt of that gratitude that I am singing like you, because I like your singing, that's why I am imitating you. So this is to be done in public. You know, we always seem to give recognition in private and never in public. And in Indian connotation, if I like music, somebody has to say, okay, wonderful, wah wah, as you know. Not at the end of the concert, but during the concert. It never disturbs us, because we are looking to those clues for the progress of the performance. So this is how the contemporary practice of Hindustani music allows a role to old age, recognizes the contribution of old age, and does not differentiate between performing virtuosity and performing depth. They are held as equal. You may lack in virtuosity, it does not matter if you have the depth. And if you have the depth, then we are compensated, fully compensated for the lack of brilliance or flashiness or tayyari as we call it, technical virtuosity, everything. One more slide please, last one. Now these are the recorded performances of older musicians. Again I have ascertained that they were old when they performed. Some of them are from older 78 RPM records. Incidentally, Ramakrishna Bua was the fifth one here. He mentions on the record, that is, he has told the company, obviously insisted, that on the record it is mentioned Ramakrishna Bua was 82 years of age. He has mentioned that on the label of the record. Now there are short, very short excerpts of 2 minutes length each. Let us start playing. Please listen to that with these remarks in mind. They have not changed their repertory. They are singing the same as they used to in their youth. This particular form is supposed to be difficult to sing. Very quick movements of voice required there.
Rasadnya जन्म जन्म की
As I said, there are these 6 illustrations which are well documented for confirming their old age and from where they sang and what type of. The basic things which old age seems to have some adverse effect on music is not in the way music can be thought about. Older musicians definitely seem to have an upper edge as far as musical imagination is concerned. Now, these are some of the conclusions which I am now putting before you. They are my conclusions, perhaps tentative ones. But I have been observing musicians for 30 years. I have learned from 4 gurus who fortunately lived long, and I could observe them right from the stages where they were in their prime and when they are in the decline. I felt that imagination-wise they did not suffer. Their voices developed some trouble, and especially in the matter of pitch. They could not get to the higher pitches very easily, or they could do that erratically. Sometimes they could do it, sometimes they did not. The third aspect was in the tempo. The warming up period necessary for getting into higher tempi was longer. But there also some of those who have really specialized in that were able to retain this facility of singing fast tempi even in very advanced stages like 82, 87. Without any impairment. And older musicians, do they feel out of place in the present musical scene? I would say partially yes. And that's because, now I think, let us come to that point here, musicianship as distinct from showmanship is to be now compared. As far as showmanship is concerned, the older musicians feel deprived because they do not get a platform. Ultimately, a performer is to be seen when he performs. Whatever we may say that music is meant for your own soul and you can remain in your own room and go on singing, well, it's okay for a while. But ultimately, you definitely need an audience. Performing art means you have to have an audience. And older musicians do not seem to get audiences. They seem to get disciples, quite a number of them. In fact, I will round off my discussion by quoting a story from Ayurveda. Jivaka was the name of the person who compiled and consolidated one basic Ayurvedic branch which is known as Kashyapa Samhita. When he compiled that, it was not recognized, it was not respected by other practitioners of Ayurveda. So he did a trick, or perhaps he thought of a plot, or he had a rare insight into human mind. He gathered all the preceptors together. Perhaps, that was a type of symposium that they had. And he said that on the branch of Ganges, all of us are now together. Then he dived deep into the river Ganges, sacred river regarded so in India. When he came up, he looked like an old man. And since then, his Kashyapa Samhita was accepted by the people. And since then, he was described as Vruddha Jivaka, that is old Jivaka. But here, Vruddha did not mean old age in the sense of deterioration of powers. Vruddha means grown. That's the original meaning. And that's why it does justice to the title of our theme, the theme of our deliberations, music, growth and aging. And I feel that the Indian perspective, as it is offered by these disciplines, as well as the performing tradition of India, has a message of peace and optimism to all who are likely to be old. Supposing there are some who are not likely to be, then there must be some mention made of that possibility. But otherwise, I am sure that in India, the perspective is more optimistic, and we definitely have a definite role allotted to the older people, because they are supposed to have a very, very important contribution to make to the social being. Thank you very much.